During the Vietnam War, many U.S. soldiers sought distractions to take them away from the tragic surroundings they found themselves in day-to-day during the war. Many of which found that in the non-inertia-related walls of a brothel. And like anything that's used a lot, the price tag goes down. So it's no surprise that the 18-year-old virgin Aurora was the brothel's prized possession with the highest price tag. One evening, U.S. soldier Benji dragged his buddy Michael to the brothel because they desperately needed a distraction. They lost a man on the field that day. And of course, being a good friend, purchased Aurora the highest price tag in that place. The other women in the brothel excitedly surrounded Aurora. This could be your ticket out of here. If you play your cards right, you could go to America. They prepped her. The two were thrown into a bedroom. Michael looked across the room at this very shy, but very beautiful young woman, and recognized the same reluctance that he felt being in that room. Aurora, too, looked across the room at Michael, surprised to see such pain in this man's face, a vulnerability she herself felt. And that vulnerability connected the two, and they were able to talk all night, talk about her orphaning at a young age and being thrown in a brothel, about his day-to-day seeing men die and how alone they both felt, that when the sun rose, they didn't want to leave each other's side. Benji grabbed his buddy, high-fived him. His friend had gone all night, right? The women corralled Aurora, wanting every single detail, but neither Aurora nor Michael divulged any information. Later that day, Aurora reflected on that magical night, how easily she'd given her heart to this foreigner, this stranger, but how connected she felt, how safe she felt, how in love she was falling. It was no surprise Michael returned later that night. And again, they laid in each other's arms and they spoke of the future. And as he held her, he realized she healed the pain that he had felt 24 hours before. That all he wanted to do was hold her, protect her, love her. And so when he asked her to marry him, he was so pleased she said yes. The next day the two were wed, and on that third night of knowing each other, they consummated their marriage. But just as quickly as this fairy tale began, the doors of the brothel swung open. All the U.S. soldiers were instructed to evacuate Saigon immediately. Michael grabs his new bride's hand, and they start running through the chaos on the streets of Saigon, trying to get to the nearest helicopter pad. And as they're making their way and elbowing through, Michael makes it past the gates of the chain link fence, but at that moment, his grasp on Aurora's hand releases. He turns around, and he watches as the U.S. soldiers hold her back with the other people of Vietnam. "Let her go, that's my wife!" Aurora turns to Michael, outstretched hands as they're pushing her farther and farther back. "Michael, don't leave me behind!" And there was nothing he can do. The space between them grew and grew as he was shoveled onto the plane and the helicopter and it began to take off. He reached out, watching her image get smaller and smaller. All he could do was yell, "I will come back for you, I promise." 5 years later, Michael awakes in a start from a nightmare. Not a day had gone by he hadn't thought about Aurora, whether or not she was alive or dead after the Vietnam War. "Is everything all right, honey?" It's the voice of Vanessa, his wife. Michael had moved on with his life, and Vanessa was a big part of that. She helped him with his PTSD post-war, and she also knew a lot about Michael's first love, his first wife. "It's nothing, honey, just another nightmare. I'll go back to bed." Back in Vietnam, Aurora was walking the streets of Saigon in the market, and just a few steps behind her, a little 4-year-old boy followed in her wake, saying, "Mommy, Mommy!" Aurora turned around and her heart smiled. There was Adam, the perfect combination of her and Michael. A reminder that every day of his promise he'd return for her. Back in the States, Michael's friend Benji storms into his living room. "Michael, she's alive! She is alive!" And at this news, Michael knew exactly what Benji was speaking of. But Michael turned to Vanessa, and she nodded in acknowledgement, and the three hopped on the first plane to Vietnam. The minute they landed, Benji and Michael searched for Aurora. Benji found Aurora first. When Aurora saw Benji, she knew that Michael had come back for her. So she got the information of the hotel from Benji and went straight to the hotel. But to her surprise, Vanessa opened the door. Vanessa saw the shock in Aurora's face, and she knew she had to explain. In that moment, Aurora realized that fairy tale she held on to for 5 years had long since ended. Michael had moved on with his life. Her happily ever after was gone. But there was still hope for her son Adam, and she was not going to get in Adam's way. So she went home, grabbed the knife off the counter, slit her wrist, fell to the ground and began bleeding out on the floor. Just as Michael arrived, ran through the door. In bewilderment, he ran to her side and cradled her. "Aurora, what have you done? What have you done?" He's crying, and his eyes are filling with tears as he looks down at this woman he once loved. She looks up at him, thinking she's dreaming, but knowing the comfort of his embrace so well. "You came back, like you promised." "Of course I came back," he started to cry, and he heard her mutter a name, Adam, and at that, a 4-year-old boy emerged from behind the furniture, shaking. Michael looked up, startled, but very quickly seeing his own face in this young boy. He looked down at Aurora for some sort of confirmation, and she smiled up at him, grabbed his hand and clutched it, and breathed, "Love him." She released his hand and let go. Madam Toastmaster.